Are you ready? Hoopa, here goes.
The power of the mind is an exceptional thing, and in the world of Pokémon, psychic types have long been considered some of the smartest and most powerful in the series. From helping others out with their ability to see in the future, to actually trying to destroy the world, the morality of psychic type Pokémon is all over the place. I'm Kyle with Pokebinge, and this is every psychic type Pokémon good to evil. Let's start with a couple ground rules. We'll be judging these Pokémon by the characteristics of the species as a whole, meaning we won't be looking at any individual instances of the Pokémon in question. An exception can be made for some legendary Pokémon, but this will mostly be on a case-by-case basis. Also, if an entire Pokémon evolutionary line shares the psychic type, they'll be sharing one spot. As usual, we'll be starting with the most noble and heroic Pokémon and working our way down to the most evil. These psychic Pokémon are the good. We gladly kneel for our gold medal of good winner, the king Pokémon, Calyrex. Since ancient times, this legendary has been held in high regard throughout the Galar region, thanks to Calyrex being known as both a benevolent and incredibly strong ruler of the land. If someone is suffering from an injury or going through an incredibly rough time and encounters Calyrex, the king Pokémon has the power to not only heal whatever pain they're going through, but is able to help calm down the more aggressive attitudes of other Pokémon such as Glastrier and Spectrier. After Calyrex is able to join forces with either the ghostly Spectrier or the chilly Glastrier, not only does the king Pokémon get quite the power boost, but Calyrex's ability to help others out increases quite a bit as well. When Calyrex is working with Spectrier, it's said that wherever these Pokémon go, they'll bring fresh plant life to barren lands. And Calyrex has gained the power to see both the past and future and use this power to save numerous lives from a meteor strike in the distant past. When Calyrex is riding the Galar region on Glastrier's back, the king Pokémon does have a little bit of negativity, as both Calyrex and Glastrier can be pretty fierce in battle towards their enemies. But unlike other Pokémon who ignore their opponent's suffering, once the battle is over, Calyrex will use their power to heal whatever wounds that were inflicted during the fight. But we're going to keep things going with more legendary Pokémon, as we're giving the silver medals of good to the Sun and Moon Pokémon, Lunala and Solgaleo. We have to give these two a shared spot given how much they have in common. Both Lunala and Solgaleo are held in high regard in the Alola region, and it's really not a surprise to see why. Though both of their Pokédex entries basically just mention that Lunala and Solgaleo are emissaries of both the Moon and Sun respectively, and that they can open Ultra wormholes, we really don't have too much to go on where their behavior is concerned. So we're turning our attention to the Sun and Moon arc of the Pokémon anime. Even though Solgaleo and Lunala both evolve from the cosmic Pokémon Cosmog in the show, much like the game, Cosmog is under the care of Lily. And while it gets easily startled and can cause some trouble, Cosmog will help others out by teleporting them away from danger at times. When Cosmog eventually evolves into Solgaleo, not only does this legendary form a deeper bond with the heroes of the show, but is willing to save Lunala when its fellow legendary is in danger. After Solgaleo is trapped in the Ultra Beast's headquarters, Lunala returns the favor, going through great lengths to save the Sun Pokémon. Probably the most helpful Pokémon in day-to-day tasks is being awarded our Bronze Medal of Good, the Emotion Pokémon, Indeedee. Both the male and female Indeedee are almost always seen close by their trainers, and the other Pokémon that they get along well with, and thanks to the psychic power coming from the horns and hair that are growing on their heads, both Indeedee are able to pick up on the future actions of their trainers and help them out. Female Indeedee will act as a babysitter, and male Indeedee perform the actions of a valet of sorts. Probably the most emotionally in-tune psychic trio are just barely missing out on a good medal, the Embrace Pokémon, the Gardevoir line. Much like Indeedee, Ralts, Kirlia, and Gardevoir are very aware of their trainers' attitudes and have an extremely deep bond with them. If they sense happiness and positive vibes around them, both Ralts and Kirlia will dance about as a way to express their gratitude. Ralts can be a bit shy if those around them are feeling gloomy or hostile, so it could use some cheering up. But it's Gardevoir that helps land this evolutionary line up so high in our ranking. It has an extremely deep relationship with their trainers, but instead of simply dancing around, if Gardevoir senses danger, they'll protect those around them at all costs. with its method of choice being to create a small black hole for others to hide in until the danger is past. Coming through space and time to our next spot, we have the time travel Pokemon, Celebi, as it'll become apparent in our good section. When it comes to psychic Pokemon, there are a ton of legendaries who are mini powerhouses, with Celebi being one of the strongest among them, due to Celebi's unique ability to travel through time. This Pokemon can literally pop up anytime and anywhere, and while that might be a surprise to some in the vicinity where Celebi unexpectedly appears, it is a common belief that whenever Celebi will make an appearance, that area is blessed with a bright future. And as seen in the anime and the movie Celebi, Voice of the Forest, when interacting with others, Celebi has a very friendly and easygoing nature. What slightly counts against this legendary is that a few of their Pokédex entries do mention that Celebi only appears at times of peace, and while we understand why Celebi is kind of selective on when to make an appearance, we feel its powers could be better used during times of hardship. Floating into our next spot, we have our next legendary, the lunar Pokemon, Kristijan. Unlike some of the other psychic types who will appear later in our list, that will use one's dreams and sleeping state for more nefarious methods, Kristijan is the Pokemon epitome of the phrase sweet dreams. One of the most peaceful Pokemon, not only in the psychic typing, but the entire series. It's often seen gliding across the night sky, seeking out those who are suffering from nightmares. Once Kristijan comes across someone who is having less than a restful night's sleep, it will give one of the feathers that covers their body to whoever is having the nightmare, which will instantly help the person or Pokemon to return to a pleasant night's sleep. One of the oldest, not to mention another powerful legendary. The next spot goes to the new species Pokemon, Mew. While Pokemon like Arceus are credited for essentially being a godlike figure in the series, Mew is the only known Pokemon to have a direct link to all Pokemon in the series due to Mew containing the DNA of every single Pokemon in their body, in addition to having a direct link to all life where Pokemon are concerned. This power grants Mew the ability to use whatever move that this legendary chooses. Outside of this pretty immense power, during Mew's appearances in movies such as Mewtwo Strikes Back, as well as the show, it's seen to not only be powerful, but playful and protective. Mew does seem a bit shy in most situations and does seem content to just observe, but when it comes to protecting others from harm, it doesn't hesitate to help. Next up, we have the Eon Pokemon, Latios and Latias. As is the case with most siblings, these two deeply care about each other and are often seen together. And while they're often seen together, Latios is seen as the more serious Pokemon of the duo, acting as more of a protective big brother, while Latias is more of a fun-loving younger sister. In the movie Pokemon Heroes, Latios and Latias both help out Ash and his friends and act as guardians of the Soul Dew. They're also pretty peaceful, as they dislike fighting, though when confronted by the villains, they are willing to protect Ash and others at the risk of their own safety. Guiding us into our next spot, we have the first Hisui Pokemon, the big horn Pokemon, Wardeer. With their gray and white fur and long mane that resembles a beard, coupled with their serious expressions, Wardeer gives us the impression of a wise old man, and it more than lives up to our impression, as they're the leader of whatever herd of Stantler that they call home, helping them travel the land and keeping them safe from danger. If they're unlucky enough to find themselves in a dangerous environment, Wardeer is able to use the orbs on their horns in order to create barriers to help keep themselves and others safe. They also allow their fur to be used as clothing and insulation for houses during the colder seasons, and even allow those they trust to ride on their backs. Next up, we have arguably the most intelligent psychic Pokemon, Oranguru. Often found in jungles or coastlines, Oranguru is held in high regard due to their incredibly high intelligence and the fact that they'll use their brain power to actually help others out. Specifically, Oranguru is able to craft potions to help cure injured Pokemon, and will also help them locate food. Outside of helping hurt and hungry Pokemon, they can also be kinda prideful, as they will only allow trainers they deem worthy to pair with them, and are distrustful of trainers they view as inexperienced. Lunala and Solgaleo aren't the only protectors of the Alola region, as the land spirit Pokemon, Tapu Lele, belongs to a group of legendaries that are viewed as deities in the island region. Similar to some of the other psychic Pokemon in this section, Tapu Lele uses their considerable powers to heal others and cares about the Pokemon and people of the Alola region deeply, though a few of its Pokédex entries mentions that Tapu Lele can possess a cruel disposition, though we never really see any of this crueler side during the Sun and Moon arc, and when compared to some of the other guardians of Alola, it is more proactive in helping others out. Galloping into our next spot, we have the unique horn Pokemon, the Galarian Rapidash line. Instead of having their typical fiery manes and tails, the Ponyta and Rapidash of the Galar region have gained flowing multicolored hair rare and take on the appearance of more traditional unicorns. And having colorful fur isn't the only change that the Galarian Rapidash line experiences. But rather than the final Pokemon in an evolutionary family having the strongest personality trait, it's Galarian Ponyta that lands these Pokemon this high in our ranking. Thanks to the small horns that grow on Galarian Ponyta's head, they've gained a healing power and are willing to help out anyone who is hurt. Once it evolves, Galarian Rapidash is well known for its bravery, even though it's also known for being very prideful. Next, we get to the Wish Pokemon, Jirachi. Don't let the fact that Jirachi looks like a young Pokemon fool you. With records going back for thousands of years, Jirachi is one of the oldest legendaries known in the Pokemon universe. A reason for Jirachi's somewhat younger appearance, though, is due to the Wish Pokemon only being awake for a week for every 1,000 years. But during that week, Jirachi has the ability to grant any wish that is brought to its attention. And while being able to grant anyone's wish is a pretty cool ability to have, there really isn't any indication that Jirachi will only grant wishes that have good intentions, and the fact that some less than ideal things could happen due to Jirachi granting the wish is far from great, though we will give this legendary Pokemon the benefit of the doubt. One of our final mini powerhouse legendaries is up next, the Victory Pokemon, Victini. For a majority of the Psychic Pokemon in this category, when it comes to their interactions with their trainers, they work well together and are pretty close, but Victini takes that bond to a whole new level, as it's believed that whatever contest Victini helps their trainers out with, they will come out the winners. And even though this is a nice thing for Victini to do, it's its actions in the movies that really showcase Victini's actions. It helps out Ash and his Pokemon quite a bit, going so far as to put its own life on the line to save Ash and his friends and other Pokemon. Next we have the Mr. Rime line. Thanks to some of the colder regions of the Galar region, the Mr. Mime of the area has adapted to the environmental change and switched from their usual Psychic type to also include the Ice type. But thanks to their type changing, it's also given Galarian Mr. Mime a love to perform for a crowd and make others happy. After Mr. Mime evolves into the Charlie Chaplin lookalike Mr. Rime, not only do they still love putting on a show for others, but it also helps the pre-evolved Mime Jr. and Mr. Mime with their performances. One of the oldest Psychic evolutionary lines, the Bronze Bell Pokemon, the Bronzong line, is up next. Often found around excavation sites that go back as far as 2,000 years ago. Not only have Bronzor and Bronzong been around for quite some time, but there's evidence that both were extremely popular in the past. It's a common belief that both of these Pokemon helped out in day-to-day activities, with Bronzor allowing themselves to take the place of mirrors. Bronzong, on the other hand, was believed to have the power to summon rain in order to help farmers with their crops and their harvests. Though as that was in the past, we don't really have any solid proof. Regardless, this pair are pretty calm and seem to get along well with those they come across. Swooping into our next spot, we have Sigilyph. Despite looking like they would not be particularly good flyers, Sigilyph has quite a few Pokédex entries that mention this Pokemon's flight patterns. And where are these flight patterns? They're often around the remnants of an ancient city, where Sigilyph was believed to be the city's guardians and emissaries. In modern times, like with the Bronzong line, Sigilyph is something of a mystery, but the likelihood of them being willing to protect others and go on missions for them are reasons enough to rank them here in the good. Next up, we have Eevee's Psychic Evolution, the Sun Pokemon, Espeon. Even though Eevee usually evolves into their various evolutions thanks to a variety of stones, when it comes to Espeon, it's actually due to Eevee having a high level of friendship with their trainers during the daytime. Once they've evolved, not only does Espeon gain some pretty significant psychic powers thanks to the orb on their heads, but their fur has become very sensitive, allowing them to detect tiny movements around them, helping Espeon get the edge in any Pokemon battle. In addition to being pretty crafty fighters, thanks to the fact that they need a high level of friendship to even evolve, Espeon has an extremely strong relationship with their trainers, and will use their powers to protect their trainers from danger. From the Paldea region, we have the Fire Warrior Pokemon, Armarouge. Like with Eevee having a branching evolution family into other Pokemon types, if a Charcadet is lucky enough to come across an auspicious armor, not only do they evolve into the arm cannon wielding Armarouge, but they become one of the few Pokemon to have the dual typing of Fire and Psychic. But rather than using their fancy new weapon to blast away at innocent targets, Armarouge has a pretty noble and respectful personality, with them being very loyal to their trainers. But as Armarouge was only introduced in Scarlet and Violet, they have only been around for a short time. time, so there may be more information to be revealed about them. Next up, let's talk about the royal Pokemon, the Slowking line. Ordinarily, Slowpoke is viewed in the Pokemon series as not being the sharpest tool in the shed, as prior to evolving, their Pokedex title is the Dopey Pokemon. But while they might not be particularly bright, Slowpoke has a very calm and laid-back personality. Once Slowpoke gets bitten in their head by a Shelder, the toxins from their attacker affect Slowpoke's brain so much that they evolve into Slowking. And with their incredibly powerful brains, Slowking is often seen as a wise advisor of sorts, with a common saying being, when in doubt, ask Slowking. Let's head deep into the sea for our next psychic legendary, the diving Pokemon, Lugia. As with some of the other legendary birds in the Pokemon universe, Lugia is said to have the power to control something, with storms being Lugia's specialty. Actually, a majority of Lugia's Pokedex entries just mention that this legendary can create storms that last up to 40 days, when Lugia flaps their wings, and not much else. We're turning to the movie The Power of One, as well as some of the episodes that Lugia appears in the show. In The Power of One, Lugia is unfortunately the target of the villain of the movie, who wants to capture the legendary for his collection. Once Lugia appears though, not only is it able to avoid capture, but has the ability to help calm down the other legendary birds, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, stopping them from fighting and return to their respective homes, as ferocity of their battle was causing a near global extermination. In the show, Lugia is seen to be a bit harder to reason with, but that is simply due to their child being captured by Team Rocket. Lugia does lash out quite a bit until they're reunited with their child, and does work with Ash and the other heroes in the show. But thanks to Lugia's Pokedex entries and how difficult this legendary was to reason with, we decided to rank them here. Moving on to the dancing Pokemon, Pau-style Oricorio. When it comes to the Oricorio species, this Pokemon is relatively unique as they're able to change their typings simply by drinking nectar from different colored flowers. And thanks to sipping the nectar from pink flowers, Oricorio has transformed into their pretty calm Pau-style form, where it is a belief that anyone who sees their relaxing dance moves will be blessed with good health. However, Pau-style Oricorio will use their captivating dancing to lower the defense of their opponents before unleashing a psychic blast. And that might just be the way that it battles, but if they're too caught up in their dancing, this Pokemon will sometimes ignore their trainer's instructions, which could leave them and their trainers open to possible harm. Well, even if you're having a crappy day, crossing paths with our next evolutionary line, the Swoobat line, will change anyone's attitude for the better. While some other cave-dwelling Pokemon might not treat others who enter their living environment very friendly, that is not the case where Woobat and Swoobat are concerned. Both Pokemon in this evolution are actually pretty cheerful and usually do not go out of their way to cause trouble for others. But it's not just their happy attitudes that land Woobat and Swoobat in our good section, as their heart-shaped noses are often viewed as symbols of good luck. Plus, whoever is fortunate enough to be close to a male Swoobat, while they're in the counting process of other Swoobats, will experience a positive mood change. We now get to our next legendary, the Melody Pokemon, Meloetta. Out of all the legendaries that we've covered on the list so far, Meloetta is probably the shyest, and there are very few recorded sightings of the Melody Pokemon. But when Meloetta does appear in the show, she is seen to get along very well with Ash and his Pokemon, especially Oshawott. Whenever Meloetta decides to sing, her music is far more powerful than your typical song, as they have the ability to change the moods of whoever is in the vicinity that hears it. But as Meloetta typically focuses on making others happy or feeling sad, she seems to want people to experience the range of emotions that her music can bring. Rolling in from the Paldea region, we have the rolling Pokemon, Rabsca. With Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, both games introduced some new and pretty unique ways to evolve certain Pokemon. And as Rellor will only evolve into the Bug/Psychic Rabsca after taking 1,000 steps using the Let's Go feature, this Pokemon is definitely one of them. Instead of the ball of mud that their previous evolution rolls around, Rabsca now has a multicolored ball that they're highly protective of. The reason for Rabsca being so overly protective of this ball, however, is because it's actually a cocoon with an infant developing inside. In addition to being willing to protect this cocoon no matter what, Rabsca is very gentle while rolling the ball along, careful not to disturb the infant sleeping inside. Gazing at our next spot, we have the fox Pokemon, Delphox. Out of all the starters in the Pokemon universe, Delphox has the unique distinction of having the Psychic type in addition to the Fire type. Thanks to their newfound abilities, Delphox will light their branch on fire in order to look into the future by staring into the flames. And while Delphox is willing to help others out if they will be affected by the future events, we don't know how often Delphox does this, but as it does seem to care about others enough to help them out, they definitely deserve a spot in the good. The next Pokemon in our good section is a literal cut above some of the others because we're giving this spot to the Blade Pokemon, the Gallade line. In the world of Pokemon, evolution is a pretty normal thing to experience. But what is a little less common are branching evolutions. However, after Ralts evolves into Kirlia, and a Dawnstone is used instead of simply leveling up, Kirlia will evolve into Gallade. Like with Gardevoir, Gallade possesses a desire to protect those that they encounter, and with razor-sharp blades on their forearms, Gallade are more than up to the task, and more often than not, just use their arm blades to protect others when they engage in a battle. Though we do dock Gallade a couple of points, since a few of their Pokedex entries mention that they're pretty savage when it comes to fighting. Unquestionably, one of the most enduring Psychic types is coming up next, the patient Pokemon, the Wobbuffet line. With their punching bag shaped bodies and the fact that they can take numerous hits and keep going regardless, Wynot and Wobbuffet are two incredibly tough Pokemon. Wynot in particular seem to really care about each other as they form tight-knit packs to travel around with. But while they do this for mostly protection, they also help one another toughen up by slamming their bodies into each other. Once it evolves into Wobbuffet, they do seem to lose the desire to help others in their group. However, Wobbuffet is one of the calmest Pokemon out there, not attacking or bothering others unless they're attacked. Undoubtedly the most mischievous legendary is stealing our next spot, the Mischief Pokemon, Hoopa Confined. Like with some of the other legendaries on this list, when it comes to Hoopa's Pokedex info, it basically just mentions that Hoopa is a troublemaker and enjoys stealing stuff from others. And while that is less than ideal behavior, in the show and movie Hoopa and the Clash of Ages, Hoopa Confined does still cause quite a bit of mischief, but also gets along well with the heroes of the show and only steals things such as food. In addition to having a somewhat playful nature with Ash and Pikachu, Hoopa Confined is willing to use their considerable power when it comes to protecting and helping others out. And rounding out our good section, we have the Knowledge Pokemon, Uxie, the Emotion Pokemon Mesprit, and the Willpower Pokemon Azelf. As you might expect from their Pokedex titles, these legendaries are responsible for bringing forth the abilities for humans and other Pokemon to think, process emotions, and gain determination and willpower. And while helping people and other Pokemon gain these essential skills, the trio also have some less than great qualities about them. It's a common belief that these Pokemon have the ability to wipe out memory and emotions if someone is unlucky enough to touch them, or even if they open their eyes to look at someone. Though these Pokemon have helped out quite a bit with the growth of every person and Pokemon on the planet, and we aren't sure if their ability to wipe out someone's memory is reversible. And with our final good Pokemon out of the way, we now descend into more neutral territory. These Psychic-type Pokemon fall in the gray area. Starting things out with a regional variant, we have the Hexpert Pokemon, the Galarian Slowking line. As is the case in all of the Slowpoke lines, these Pokemon have a strong connection, quite literally, with Shellder. But while the Slowpoke of Johto have been bitten in the noggin by Shellder to evolve into Slowking, which greatly boosts their intelligence, the Slowpoke of Galar are a bit different. Sure, they get additional smarts thanks to Shellder's toxins. However, it has also transformed Galarian Slowking into a more mysterious Pokemon, as they're often seen chanting spells and using their newfound skills to brew potions. But what we don't know is if the nature of these incantations are meant to help others out, or if they're more sinister in nature. Our next evolutionary line must really be a fan of teamwork, as we have the Coconut Pokemon, the Executor line, coming up next. In the world of Pokemon, where unique evolutions pop up in every generation, Execute evolving into Executor is one of the more iconic and bizarre evolutions from Generation 1. These two depend on others in their own group to get through life. Though unlike some of the other Psychic types that we've discussed so far, that work well in their own evolutionary families, like the Wobbuffet line, who help each other toughen up, Execute and Executor only really work together when it comes to fighting and moving from place to place. If an Execute becomes separated from the group, however, they'll all become panicked and really unable to do anything until they're reunited. And even though Executor is more mobile than Execute, if all three heads cannot agree on which direction to walk, they'll stay rooted in the same spot until a decision is agreed upon. Moving on to the Musharna line. With their small, somewhat spherical bodies, large eyes, and floral patterned skin, Muna is both equally innocent looking as well as being somewhat creepy. While their large snouts cover their mouths, it's a habit of Muna to enter a sleeping person's house in order to snack on whatever dreams they come across. And it really doesn't seem that Muna cares about what sorts of dreams they make a meal out of, going after pleasant dreams as well as nightmares. Once Muna evolves into Musharna, the energy from the dreams they've consumed becomes a mist that emits out of Musharna's forehead. One of the more disturbing facts about Musharna is if they've eaten a nightmare and someone gets too close, it has the ability of transforming that nightmare from a dream to a reality. But we'll place them in the higher end of our gray section, since they don't really discriminate when it comes to what dreams they eat, so they can be helpful when it comes to getting rid of nightmares. We've covered a few psychic types that have been around since ancient times already, but probably the oldest psychic evolutionary line is up next, the Cladle line. Like with Sigalith, both Baltoy and Cladle are often found near the ruins of ancient cities, with some murals dating as far back as 20,000 years ago, showing these Pokémon living with citizens. But much like the Golem of mythology and Pokémon like the Porygon line, Baltoy and Cladle are believed to have been artificially made and given life. And while they may have been made by ancient people, what brings them down to the gray area is, unlike some other ancient Pokémon, we don't really have any clue on their relationship with these people after they were made. From the sunny waters of the Alola region. Next up we have Bruxish. Often seen near the shoreline, Bruxish usually will bury themselves in the sand on the seafloor, with only their forehead protruding, and wait for unassuming Pokémon to pass by. Thanks to the psychic abilities that the growth on their forehead grants them, Bruxish is able to detect and track down any Pokémon that dwell in the water in order to make a meal out of them. And if we only knew about its hunting habits, we'd be placing this Pokémon lower in the ranking. However, since they usually go after other Pokémon that could pose a danger to others, the lifeguards of the Alola region have a high regard for Bruxish and the help that they provide. Taking the next spot, we have the constraint Pokémon, the Meowstic line. Despite looking like a stuffed animal that many would love to decorate their rooms with, Esper is capable of unleashing incredible psychic energy. Thanks to the organs that cover their ears, however, Esper is able to maintain a firm grip on their powers. However, doing so is the reason for Esper's perpetually blank expression. After evolving into Meowstic, they no longer seem to have the worry about losing control of their psychic abilities. But like with some other Pokemon families, once Esper evolves into Meowstic, they have different appearances, as well as dispositions based on their genders. With the male Meowstic, they do get a boost in their powers, but they more often than not use these powers in order to protect themselves and others in dangerous situations. Unfortunately, we can't say the same about the females in the Meowstic line. They're noted for being much more selfish and aggressive, using their abilities on others to get what they want, and tormenting others if things aren't going their way. Let's talk about the Wind Chime Pokemon, the Chimecho line. Chingling and Chimecho are two Pokemon who, while they both have pretty calm dispositions, can still cause some pretty significant damage. Thanks to the bell-like orb inside Chingling's mouth, they're capable of unleashing incredibly high-frequency cries that, even though others might not be able to hear, they can cause painful headaches and, in some cases, hearing loss. Thankfully, once Chingling evolves into Chimecho, they seem to quit this habit. But while Chimecho might not attempt to ruin someone's ability to hear, they are able to send both people and Pokemon flying into the waves of sound that they create. That said, to its credit, the only way Chingling will evolve into Chimecho is if they have a high level of friendship with their trainers. Probably the calmest psychic type in this section is up next, the classic Slowbro line. Like we covered with both versions of Slowking, once Slowpoke has become attached to Shelder, their bodies change pretty drastically. Instead of their heads munched on, Slowpoke have opted to dip their tails in the water in order to get a bite. And while Shelder does help Slowpoke gain incredible intelligence to evolve into Slowking, there really isn't too much of a difference between Slowpoke's and Slowbro's intelligence or demeanor. With that said, we will say Slowpokes are maybe the chillest Pokemon of all time. Roll out your yoga mats for our next evolutionary line, the Meditate Pokemon, the Medicham line. While yoga has long been proven to be beneficial to one's health, we doubt that you'd find anyone more dedicated to the practice than Meditite and Medicham. Often found in mountainous regions, they're constantly meditating in order to hone their skills, going so far as to only eat once a month to help them achieve a heightened state. And while they seem to be relatively peaceful Pokemon, they do normally live in a self-imposed isolation, so it's hard to say how they would be in a not-so-secluded environment. Our first Paldea evolutionary line is up next, the long neck Pokemon, the Farigiraf line. Girafarig, the first Pokemon in this duo, is one of the few Pokemon in the series who have kind of a parasitic relationship. Unlike some others though, like the Bulbasaur line, who have a plant growing on their back, Girafarig's tail has a small brain that is actually pretty aggressive, as their tail will only bite those who get close enough. But while Girafarig's tail has some harsh habits, it seems like Girafarig is pretty peaceful otherwise. Plus, even though their tail is kind of vicious, it will do their best to protect Girafarig, going as far as to stay awake when it's sleeping and keeping an eye out when they eat. Once Girafarig learns Twin Beams, their tail is able to fully transform into a thick armor for the now evolved Farigiraf, drastically increasing their powers. Girafarig does kind of take advantage of this tough neck and head covering by unleashing powerful headbutts to their enemies. Next up, we have one of the most unusual evolutionary families, the multiplying Pokemon, the Reuniclus line. Despite appearing like a fairly weak Pokemon, Solosis, the first stage in this evolutionary line, actually has some pretty impressive psychic abilities. Even though they are essentially just a living cell in a blob of unknown goo, Solosis is able to communicate telepathically with others in order to create a powerful attack, in order to drive away their enemies. Once Solosis evolves into Duosian, like their name suggests, their brain is split into two sections. As a result, not only does this significantly increase its psychic powers, which can cover over half a mile, but they're able to do two separate tasks at the same time, and do both extremely well. Where Reuniclus is concerned, instead of living in a blob of goo, the immense psychic energy has expanded out to form powerful arms for this Pokemon, and it's able to use these arms to either crush boulders into rubble or beat others into submission. Swimming up from the Paldea region, we have the Jettison Pokemon, Veluza. Everyone has to eat something, but with Veluza, this fish has probably one of the most unusual and kind of disturbing methods of hunting. They have the ability to strip off their own flesh in order to enhance their speed and hunting skills. Outside of their hunting habits though, not much is known about Veluza, since they are still relatively new to the series. So let's just move into our next evolutionary line, the Mystic Pokemon, the Xatu line. Natu, as they are fairly small Pokemon, have underdeveloped wings and as a result, really aren't the best of flyers. However, what Natu lacks in their flying ability, they've made up for with a strong ability to hop several feet in one jump, often to find food from the many cactuses that grow around their homes. Once they evolve into Xatu, sure, they no longer have any problems in taking flight. But even though they now have fully developed wings and are considerably bigger than Natu, Xatu is often seen just standing and gazing into the distance, not moving for several hours at any given time. A common belief is the reason why Xatu remains motionless for hours is because they're able to see into the future. But unlike some other Pokemon who use their abilities to help others, Xatu is frozen in place by fear of what is coming. Tricking their way into the next spot, we have the Manipulate Pokemon, the Grumpig line. When it comes to the dispositions of the Pokemon in this section, Spoink probably is one of the calmest, as they're often seen to be using their spring-like tails to bounce from place to place, and not really bothering anyone. And as adorable as this is, Spoink has one of the saddest and most disturbing Pokédex entries known about them. Rather than simply being a means of transportation, Spoink's tails acts as a mini defibrillator of sorts, as the shock of the bouncing literally keeps Spoink's heart beating, and if they stop for longer than a few seconds, they'll die. Luckily, once it evolves, they no longer have to worry about cardiac arrest just because they stopped moving. But that doesn't mean Grumpig is content with just staying still. However, instead of just hopping around, Grumpig loves to dance around, but not for enjoyment, as it uses its dancing to manipulate their opponents while in battle, in order to give them an edge. Next, we have the unofficial Sun and Moon Pokemon, Solrock and Lunatone. They're both able to hover in midair thanks to the psychic energy that emits from their bodies. And for the most part, Solrock and Lunatone seem to be pretty peaceful Pokemon that are content to just be on their own. While engaging in battle, these Pokemon do exhibit some of the behaviors that you would expect from sentient planets, with Solrock having the ability to blind their opponents with the intense light that they can give off, and with Lunatone preferring to lull their opponents to sleep. But outside of their battling habits, they both are a bit of a mystery. Speaking of mysterious Pokemon, let's talk about Starmie. With their bright colors and graceful movements underwater, Starmie has long been admired in the Pokemon universe for their beauty. And while being admired is normally a pretty awesome feeling, Starmie absolutely lives up to their Pokédex title where their behavior is concerned. Not much is known about Starmie's interactions with others, but a more unusual fact known about them is that they can send electrical signals from their red gems that can reach the furthest depths of the universe. What the motives are behind these signals, nobody can say for sure. Swooping in from the Hisui region, we have another regional form with the battle cry Pokemon, Hisuian Braviary. Unlike their descendants in the main Pokemon series who prefer to live in flocks, Hisuian Braviary is often seen to be alone and prefers their solitude. While hunting, Hisuian Braviary is capable of firing sonic blasts infused with psychic energy in order to blast water Pokemon sky high before snatching them up. That said, if they're able to connect well with someone, they are willing to fly them to various locations to help them out. We finally get to one of the most classic psychic evolutionary lines, the Alakazam line. We've already covered some very brainy Pokemon in our rankings so far, but if we were to choose which psychic Pokemon was the smartest of the bunch, we would have to go with the Alakazam line. And while Abra, Kadabra, and Alakazam are known for having a high level of smarts and psychic power to boot, unfortunately for this Pokemon trio with this ranking, they don't seem very interested in helping others out with their advanced intelligence. Abra seems more concerned with trying to avoid interacting with anyone who crosses their path, as they're able to teleport away, even when they're asleep, whenever they sense someone approaching them. And while wanting to be left alone isn't bad, once Abra evolves into Kadabra, they do have some less than great tendencies. Luckily for Kadabra, we don't think that the weird story of a young child with psychic powers transforming into this Pokemon is true, mostly because it's a really disturbing implication. But we also think it's just a really weird cautionary tale in the Pokemon universe. Unfortunately though, due to the immense psychic energy that Kadabra emits from their body, they can cause intense headaches from anyone nearby, and can possibly cause electronics to go haywire. Like we said, in terms of smarts, we feel like Alakazam would take the cake as their IQ is a whopping 5,000, with their brains constantly growing to take in new information. But while Pokemon such as Oranguru and Slowking are willing to help others solve problems thanks to their smarts, the same isn't known about Alakazam. Next, let's talk about the symbol Pokemon, Unknown. As these small floating Pokemon are based on the alphabet, there are well over 20 versions of them. When they gather together, Unknown are capable of unleashing incredible psychic power, such as creating realistic illusions, and can even read the minds of others. The illusions that Unknown can create, though, could be possibly dangerous, as seen in the movie Spell of the Unknown, where they create an entire fortress in order to keep the heroes from getting to the young girl that Unknown had created the illusions for. Swaying into our next spot, we have the human-shaped Pokemon, the Jinx line. Smoochum, the first Pokemon in the Jinx line, explores their curiosity in a pretty unnerving way. Smoochum will use her very sensitive lips to investigate anything or anyone that grabs her interest. As you might expect, very few people and other Pokemon are less than thrilled about having Smoochum randomly place her lips on them. That said, when it comes to Jinx, they are actually pretty popular in some areas, as many admire Jinx's beautiful dancing. Next up, we have the final regional variant in this section, Galarian Slowbro. Instead of dipping their tails in the water in order to get a bite from shelter, in order to gain the regional form, Slowpoke have been chomped in their arms by the aquatic Pokemon. Unlike their more mellow Kanto relatives though, Galarian Slowbro really doesn't seem to care about the damage they can cause. While engaging in a Pokemon battle, Galarian Slowbro will squeeze the tongue of the shelter in order to fire a poison out of the tip of the shell. However, in addition to their opponent being the target of Galarian Slowbro's attack, they can cover pretty much everything in the area with the poison. Putting on a show for our next spot, we have the barrier Pokemon, the Mr. Mime line. Mime Jr. and Mr. Mime do share some of the qualities that their Galar counterparts have, but while the Mime Jr. and Mr. Mime of the Galar region just seem to enjoy putting on a show simply for the sheer enjoyment of it, the Kanto versions of the Mr. Mime line is more focused on being the center of attention. Mime Jr. will sneak up on a pretty regular basis, and try their best to copy anyone that they come across. Normally though, Mime Jr. does this as a form of entertainment, but if they find themselves in a Pokemon battle, it will use this tactic to confuse their opponent before trying to make a hasty escape. Once they evolve into Mr. Mime, as much as they enjoy performing, they take their craft a bit too seriously, as if they're interrupted or don't get the response they're looking for. Mr. Mime will relentlessly smack whoever caused the interruption. While putting on a show is usually a nice thing to do, we seriously feel that both Mime Jr. and Mr. Mime should mellow out a bit and allow others to take center stage from time to time. In our second to last gray area spot, we have the Psychic Bug Pokemon, the Orbeetle line. While Blipblug, the first Pokemon in this evolutionary line, might be incredibly small, they're also known for not being the strongest Pokemon out there. Thankfully for Dottler though, once it evolves, not only do they continue to grow more intelligent, but with a tough shell that is now encasing their body. Dottler is able to endure most attacks that come their way. They might not be the most mobile, as Dottler seems to focus more on using their powers to observe the outside world, and to store up their energy for their final evolution. Orbeetle are not only the smartest Pokemon in this evolutionary family, with their pretty large barons being protected by the shells that cover their backs. They're able to detect things happening in a 6-mile radius. But the reason why we rank them in the lower end of the gray area is because it's one of the few Pokemon who have a Gigantamax form, and what can happen when they do Gigantamax is pretty disturbing. If it decides to use their power when Gigantamaxing, they would be able to control the minds of every living thing in their vicinity. And since it can reach up to 6 miles before they Gigantamax, we shudder to think how much further they could reach when they're kaiju-like size. And rounding out our gray area, we have a legendary that is quite literally out of this world, the DNA Pokemon, Deoxys. Some Pokemon appear that they might have come to Earth from outer space, but Deoxys is one of the few Pokemon that has actually come from a distant universe. And where Deoxys calls home isn't the only thing that sets them apart either, as they have the very unique ability to increase any particular stat they want, and go through a pretty drastic appearance change, with their appearance mirroring whatever stat is the highest. For the most part, Deoxys is kind of a mystery, as they really haven't had any major roles in the anime, and their Pokédex entries basically just mention that Deoxys was born after a virus mutated in space. But we have to rank them at the very end of the gray area, because in the games Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby, Deoxys does act as a bit of a threat to the Hoenn region, as they're riding on a comet that is on a collision course with Earth. Finally, we arrive at the Psychic Pokemon who might have incredible brains and power, but instead of using them for good, they happily use them to torment others and watch the world burn. These Psychic-type Pokemon are the bad and the evil. We start with our final regional form, the cruel Pokemon, Galarian Articuno. You may have noticed a running theme in our ranking, as all Pokemon starting each category hail from the Galar region. But while Articuno's Kanto counterpart is a fairly decent Pokemon, going so far as to help those lost in the snow to find their way to safety, Galarian Articuno definitely lives up to their Pokédex title. Known for their cold and callous personality, Galarian Articuno looks down on pretty much anyone it comes across, even using their signature move Freezing Glare on others outside of battle, just to avoid interacting with them. From the grasslands of the Paldea region, we have the ostrich Pokemon, the Espartha line. To paraphrase its Scarlet Pokédex page, looks can be deceiving. Flittle is usually just happy to float along the grasslands in search of berries and stuff to eat. If someone does steal their berries, however, it will chase them down in order to enact revenge. What revenge they take is unknown, but Flittle's actions are somewhat understandable. With Espartha, they don't seem to care about food as much, but they are noted for being pretty vicious. Like with Galarian Articuno, Espartha can freeze others simply by looking at them. It's unknown what it does once they stop others in their steps, but as they have a vicious nature, it wouldn't be surprising if they at least injure them once they're immobile. Moving on to the silent Pokemon, the Hatteran line. Despite looking like a trio of storybook witches, Hatenna, Hattrem, and Hatteran prefer to live deep in the woods away from others. If anyone crosses any of these Pokemon's paths and aren't careful about controlling their volume, they will instantly be in the bad books of this evolutionary line. Hatenna has the most mild response by far, as she's already a pretty timid Pokemon. If she senses any strong emotions around her, Hatenna will run away, until they're alone once again. However, Hattrem is nowhere near as timid. With its incredibly thick hair that has grown into pigtails, she now has a pair of handy weapons that Hattrem uses to pummel anyone who gets near her, that are either feeling powerful emotions or or aren't keeping their activities to a minimum volume. The reason why Hatchrim does this is because any loud emotion is like an unendurably loud sound to them. Once it evolves into Hatterin, it's possible that she isn't as sensitive to loud noises and emotions, as only Hatterin's Shield Pokédex page mentions them disliking loud sounds. But even then, it will use the long and sharp tentacle-like growth from her hat in order to violently tear any offender apart. In addition to willingly turning anyone into confetti with her tentacle, Hatterin has the ability to create illusions just to mess with those who wander into her forest purely for her enjoyment. Moving on to the astral body Pokemon, the Gothitol line. Gothita will stare off into the distance, apparently looking at something only they can see. If someone breaks their concentration or accidentally touches the ribbon-like growths on their heads, however, it will attack whoever the offender is before resuming their usual activity. But when it evolves into Gothorita is when the really concerning behavior starts. Even though they're most active at nighttime, Gothorita is able to use its psychic powers on others in order to control them, and once it's placed whoever they want under their control, they will kidnap them. Some of Gothorita's Pokédex entries mention they prefer children, while others say they will go after anyone. What they do with those they kidnap, we really have no idea. Once it evolves into Gothitol, luckily, they seem to have stopped the incredibly bad habit of kidnapping innocent victims. Well, at least for the most part, as their Sword Pokédex mentions that after a criminal crossed paths with Gothitol, they went missing. When it comes to its interactions with their trainers, they're able to see their lifespan and will cry as a result, which is both sweet and very creepy. We finally come to the evolutionary line that has probably the most sinister rumors about them. The Hypnosis Pokemon, the Hypno line. Everyone does have to eat, but when it comes to Drowsy's preferred food of choice, they really enjoy munching on the dreams of others. And it seems like Drowsy doesn't mind a bit of breaking and entering, since a few of their Pokédex entries mentions that if you experience a tickling sensation in your nose while you sleep, it could be an indication that Drowsy is nearby, eating your dreams. And for the cherry on top of Drowsy's problematic sundae, they prefer to target children, as apparently their dreams are much tastier. When it comes to Hypno's diet, they don't seem to be as concerned with eating the dreams of others. However, their actions more than live up to their names, as Hypno is able to place whoever they choose under hypnosis and put them to sleep. But rather than helping them get a good rest, Hypno will kidnap them and take them to who knows where. And like with Drowsy, Hypno prefers their targets to be children. And what happens to these kids afterwards, nobody knows. That said, they do have one positive on their record, as they'll both help people suffering from insomnia have a good night's sleep. But probably just to eat those tasty dreams. Let's talk about the Metagross line. While Beldum is by far the most mild Pokemon in this line, what the only harsh thing we can really say about them is the fact that they'll slash at others with the sharp claws on the back of their bodies. The middle Pokemon in this line, Metang, is where the pretty awful behavior begins. Metang are known for being relentless when it comes to chasing down their prey, and while this is not great, what really counts against them is the fact Metang will collide with jets. Luckily for Metang, due to their incredibly tough bodies, they're not actually injured by these collisions. But unlucky for everyone else, they're all probably dead. When the Iron Leg Pokemon finally evolves into Metagross, thankfully it doesn't seem to have the habit of causing damage to aircrafts, but that's probably the only positive thing we can say about them. While this Pokemon is one of the most intelligent out there, Metagross uses their smarts not to help others, but to use the complex calculations to help their ruthless battling style. And when it gets hungry, watch out, due to the strength in their 4 legs. Metagross can catch pretty much anything they want before pinning them down to the ground and chewing them to bits. Arguably one of the most sympathetic villains in the series is claiming our next spot, the genetic Pokemon Mewtwo. Mewtwo has one of the biggest overreactions ever. In the first movie, Mewtwo strikes back due to Giovanni and Team Rocket using the DNA spliced from Mew. After learning that they're a clone, however, Mewtwo gains a very misanthropic attitude towards both people and Pokemon that are not clones. As a result of Mewtwo's views, this legendary wants to use all the clone Pokemon that Mewtwo has created to rule the world, as Mewtwo views them as being superior. And Mewtwo actually comes pretty close to reaching their goal, as the majority of the clones are stronger than their counterparts. Once Ash sacrifices himself to save Pikachu, however, Mewtwo is able to see the value of life and how their perceptions of all people were wrong, reforming in the process. Mewtwo's Pokédex entries, however, just cover how this legendary is pretty savage, and a few even mention that when Mewtwo was created, the scientists forgot to give Mewtwo a warm heart. Does Mewtwo have a tragic past, and do we feel sorry for this Pokemon? Absolutely. But does Mewtwo's actions also justify their ranking in the evil section? Also yes. Things get a bit topsy-turvy when it comes to our next evolutionary line, the overturning Pokemon, the Malamar line. Inkay appears like a pretty innocent Pokemon, but thanks to the lights that emit from their heads, they're able to wipe out anyone's strength they come across. Thankfully, they just do this to make a hasty escape. But when they evolve into Malamar is when the threat really begins. Malamar can use their powers on others in order to have control over them, but while Inkay is just looking to make an escape, Malamar has other ideas of what to do with those that are under this Pokemon's control. If Malamar is craving some munchies, they have the ability to draw whoever is unfortunate enough to be Malamar's target close to them before wrapping them in their many tentacles and finishing them off with their digestive juices. And what really ranks them lower is Malamar's Shield Pokedex entry, which states that they've played a role in history-changing events. Claiming our Bronze Medal of Evil, we have the Cerebral Pokemon, the Behem line. Like some of the stories of extraterrestrials that this evolutionary line is based on, Elgyem and Behem love to mess with the minds of others. Elgyem's preferred method of mind tampering might not be as horrific as Behem, as they just have the power to touch their target's brains via their psychic powers, and give them a squeeze, which will result in debilitating headaches. But as brains are so delicate, if Elgyem isn't careful or simply doesn't care, they can cause irreparable damage to their targets. Behem, on the other hand, kicks the disturbing behavior up a few notches. Instead of being happy and just squeezing someone's brains, they gladly will go in there and alter the memories of whoever they choose. And while whoever they do this to is still alive and kicking after the process is over, Behem could essentially kill their target's personality if they really wanted to. Some other spacefaring Pokemon might get along with others and have decent personalities, but these guys do not come in peace. Far below the confined form of this legendary, we're giving our Silver Medal of Evil to Hoopa Unbound. When it comes to Pokemon who are either part of the same evolutionary line or have gender differences, Hoopa's confined and unbound forms are night and day. While Hoopa Confined is a happy-go-lucky Pokemon who does cause some mischief here and there, it is overall a decent Pokemon at heart. Hoopa Unbound is simply Fury Unleashed, attacking everything and everyone that this legendary encounters. And just like when this legendary is in its confined form, Hoopa Unbound is able to create portals, but instead of using these portals to simply snag food or to play lighthearted pranks, Hoopa Unbound is able to summon other legendaries, as seen in the movie Hoopa and the Clash of Ages. Unfortunately for everyone else except Hoopa, this legendary not only uses their powers to cause a lot of damage, but also is able to use the other Pokemon summoned to wreak havoc as well. Thankfully, Hoopa Confined is able to regain control of their darker side and prevent further damage, but for all the harm Hoopa Unbound causes, we're giving this legendary the Silver Medal of Evil. And finally, we get to our last entry. We have the Prism Pokemon, Necrozma, ripping and tearing away our Gold Medal of Evil. We had a Pokemon with 3 different forms kick off this entire list, but while Calyrex is widely acknowledged in the Galar region for being a very benevolent Pokemon, all 3 of Necrozma's forms are famous in the Alola region for all the wrong reasons. Even before Necrozma took control of either Solgaleo or Lunala, this legendary is known and feared throughout the Alola region for its incredibly savage disposition and immense power, and will chase down any powerful sources of light, which is why Necrozma targets both Solgaleo and Lunala. Once Necrozma is able to gain control of whichever legendary is unlucky enough to fall under Necrozma's grasp, their savagery goes through the roof. If Lunala is Necrozma's target and gets transferred into Dawnwing Necrozma, not only is Lunala's personality essentially wiped out, but Necrozma has one desire when possessing the Moon Pokemon: reduce the world to ashes. Dawnwing's Necrozma sees everyone as an enemy, and absolutely nobody is safe. And if Solgaleo is the one that Necrozma goes after, not only is Duskmane Necrozma incredibly fast, but it ramps up their viciousness to a new level. Duskmane Necrozma might not be able to reduce the world to a smoldering landscape, but anyone that even goes near Duskmane Necrozma will be sliced to ribbons in mere seconds before this legendary searches out their next targets. Getting Lunala and Solgaleo free of Necrozma's influence is one of the most satisfying moments in the entire series. But with crimes like murder, attempted world destruction, brainwashing, and more, Necrozma in all their forms is not only the most dangerous psychic Pokemon, but easily wins the Gold Medal of Evil as well. And with our morality spectrum wrapped up, let's close things out by handing out some Sinner medals. As their name alone indicates their lack of speed, we're giving our Sloth Award to the entirety of the Slowpoke line. And while we're at it, we're also giving Slowbro the Darwin Award, since it takes them a while to even realize they've been attacked and are noted for not being the brightest Pokemon out there. Having self-worth is an important quality to have, but we're giving the Pride Medal to Galarian Rapidash, due to just how highly it thinks of itself. Taking home the Wrath Medal is Necrozma, as this legendary's only intent is to cause as much damage as possible and watch the world burn. Since she uses her lips to investigate stuff, we feel like Smoochum is a good contender for the Lust Award. We're also just super glad that after she evolves into Jinx, this behavior stops. And finally, we award the Greed Medal to Malamar, as this Pokemon is willing to manipulate whoever they can in order to get what it wants.